Okay, now is our time to introduce our special guest. It's Reverend Kathy!
I'm a special guest. It's great to see everybody today. You know, there is a lot going on in the world of holidays and celebrations today. February, I bet you've not heard of this one. Some of you may have, but February 2nd marks the second day of a Celtic holiday called Imbolc. I knew Erica would know. Along with St. Bridget's feast day. Yeah, so Imbolc symbolizes the spark of the light of spring in the heart of winter, and it invites us to reconnect to the slower and deeper meaning of the natural rhythms of the seasons. That's a good thing. And Bridget, she was a fire goddess. She's a patroness of poets and seers and metalsmiths, and she was the heart and fire of the hearth, which is the center of the community and the home, of course. Now we know that Christian holidays morphed from the pagan ones and liberally borrowed not only their dates, but some of their traditions as well. So today is also the holiday known as Candlemas. It's also known as Candelaria in Spanish-speaking countries. And it is a Christian holiday, and it has aspects in common, as you might have guessed, with Imbolc. Its celebration can be traced back to the 4th century Greek history and was a purification holiday. And again, a celebration of the return of the light, as so many of our celebrations are. And it also celebrates 3 other occasions according to Christian belief. And the first was the presentation of the child Jesus. The second, Jesus' first entry into the temple. And the third, which is mostly celebrated within Catholic communities, celebrates the Mother Mary's purification. And as many Christians consider Jesus the light of the world, you can imagine that it's called Candlemas, and it involves candles. And a candlelit procession always precedes the Mass on this day. And in some parts of Europe, such as France, they cook crepes. I don't know where that originated, but they not only cook crepes, but they cook crepes while holding a coin in their hand. This is to signify that good fortune will stay with them throughout the year until the next February 2nd rolls around. And lest we forget this really important holiday, it's also Groundhog Day. Also morphed, and this is a tradition that's been celebrated in both Canada and the United States since 1887. Derives from Pennsylvania Dutch custom. And we all know, if the groundhog emerges from its burrow and sees its shadow, because the weather is clear, that means it's going to return to its den and winter's going to last another 6 weeks. If it doesn't see its shadow because the day is cloudy, then spring will arrive early. Now this morphed, again, from Germany, where the badger, not the ground, we don't have badgers, I guess, but the badger was the weather predictor for German communities. And this appears to be an enhanced version of the lore that clear weather on the Christian holy day of Candlemas forebodes a prolonged winter. So you see how these are all connected? Oh, but I forgot. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that today is also Super Bowl Sunday, which Americans seem to celebrate to a depth and breadth that this non-sports loving person cannot really understand. And I'm not sure where this holiday fits into the evolution of all the other holidays celebrated on February 2nd. Food, there you go, food. Very good, thank you. But we know all of these holidays may change in form and function, but they all are connected, and they all are connected by light and love. When we choose to focus on the ties that bind us, the similarities as they change and evolve through the ages, rather than the differences, Then we're focusing on those golden threads that bespeak of light and love. And guess what our theme is for February? The colors of love. And thank you, Dennis and Christy. Your songs were absolutely perfect. Yeah, both of them. Perfect. Thank you so much. It's true. Love comes in all colors, all shapes, all sizes, all relationships. And love is felt, but it's not something that you can pick up and examine in and of itself. It can only be experienced in secondary ways, right? We see love when we see a dad caress his child. We feel love when we're caressed by our beloved. We taste love when maybe our mom makes our favorite pie or our favorite cake for our birthday. And we hear love when an exquisite piece of music is played. Love is always connected to our senses. And love is always God expressing, God made visible on this plane, if you will. The Sufi poet Hafiz wrote about this many centuries ago, 13th century, I believe. He wrote, "The sun's eyes are painting fields again. Its lashes with expert strokes are sweeping across the land. A great palette of life has embraced this earth. What excitement will renew your body when we all begin to see that God's heart resides in everything. God has a root in each act and creature that it draws its mysterious divine from." God's eyes are painting the fields again. The beloved with its own hands is tending, raising like a precious child itself in you. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. In the Glossary of the Science of Mind text, Dr. Holmes gives his definition of love. He says, love is the self-givingness of spirit through the desire of life to express itself in terms of creation. He says Emerson tells us that love is also a synonym for God. And we're also told in the New Testament that he that loves not knoweth not God, for God is love. Love is free from condemnation, even as it is free from fear. Love is a cosmic force whose sweep is irresistible. Let me go back to the Celts for a moment. There is a term, anam cara, which was popularized by the Irish poet John O'Donoghue, who wrote a book by the same name. Anam cara means soul friend. Anam is the Gaelic word for soul, and cara, the word for friend. In Celtic tradition, an anam cara is a teacher and a companion and a spiritual guide. With the anam cara, you can safely share whoever you are, your innermost self, good, bad. You can reveal the hidden intimacies of your life, your mind, and your heart without fear. Because this friendship cuts across all convention to create an act of recognition and belonging that joins souls in ancient and eternal ways. In everyone's life, there is a great need for an anam cara, a soul friend, because in this relationship, you are understood and embraced without mask, without pretension. And we know that it's true that when we are deeply understood and accepted, that's when we feel most at home. And love is the threshold where the divine and the human ebb and flow, one into the other. This love can include a depth of awareness and reverence for presence. And this awareness brings integration and healing, one of the greatest gifts of the friendship. As a result of having a friend, an anam cara, we begin to look and see and understand differently. And we refine our sensibility and transform our ways of being in the world. The anam cara is a loved one who awakens your life in order to free the unlimited possibilities within you. In 1923, when he was 40, the renowned Bohemian is really a euphemism, but he was the renowned Bohemian novelist and short story writer, Franz Kafka. He never married, he never had children, but one day he was strolling through Stieglitz Park in Berlin when he came upon a young girl who was crying her eyes out because she had lost her favorite doll. So Kafka stopped and listened to her and helped her to look for that doll. And when they didn't find that doll, Kafka told her, "You come back tomorrow and we'll look some more." So they met in the park the next day, and when they didn't find the doll again, Kafka had a letter ready for her, and he gave the little girl a letter that was written by the doll and said, "Please don't cry. I've gone on a trip to see the world. I'm going to write you about my adventures." And as you can imagine, this began a story that lasted to the end of Kafka's life. When they would meet, Kafka would read aloud his carefully composed letters of adventures experienced by this doll. And of course, the little girl found this absolutely enchanting. Finally, Kafka read her a letter of the story that brought the doll back to Berlin. And then he gave her a doll that he had purchased. Well, the little girl looked at the doll and she goes, "Oh, this doesn't look like my doll at all." He was ready for that too. He had a letter for her that explained, "My trips, they have changed me." Oh, the little girl accepted that, hugged the new doll, took it home with her, and loved it and kept it until many years later, the now grown-up girl found tucked away into one of the little crevices of the little girl's dress, a little pocket, she found a tiny letter, and she opened it up, and it was signed by Kafka, and it said, "Everything you love is likely to be lost, but in the end, love will return in a different way." I think that this story beautifully illustrates the concept of Anam Cara. This young girl was privileged to have made a friend, a soul friend, who deeply understood her needs in the moment, nurtured her creativity, awakened her possibilities, and then finally left her with such a kernel, a pearl of wisdom. How many of you have been blessed with an Anam Cara? And great. And how many of you have been an Anam Cara to other people? Yeah. I would say more people than raised their hands in this room. When you are that, you are the self-givingness of spirit in action. Giving love, making love, receiving love, they're all spiritual acts, and they are gateways to the experience of God operating through you and as you. As the song says, God is love, and so are you. Now, my good friend Philip, who used to work with me when I worked at hospice, he once told a story about sitting at the bedside of a dying man. And this man was in great existential pain because he was going through the process of life review, and he was thinking that his life had no meaning and value. He wept when he told Philip that he felt that he hadn't really done anything worthwhile in this life. And he was deeply saddened that he would be leaving this world without leaving a contribution behind, without contributing anything memorable. Philip was a wonderful spiritual counselor, and he had a way of carefully crafting conversations to bring about the awakening that was needed in that moment. So through this conscious and careful guiding of the conversation, Philip helped the man to realize that his contribution to life, his gift, had been his ability and his willingness to be present for his friends. Because the dying man's life wasn't taken up with a drive to achieve or produce anything. He had a lot of time to be present with his friends, to nurture them, to love them, to embrace them, to accept them, to help them with their personal challenges. When the conversation ended, the man was finally able to acknowledge his contributions and admit that they had been real and valuable. And within a few days, he passed peacefully. Anam Cara. The poet Tagore wrote, "Love is the only reality, and it is not a mere sentiment. It is the ultimate truth that lies at the heart of creation." So, what gets in the way of letting love shine through us? Shine, as Margot said. We all need to shine. Why is it that some people are so easy to love and others so difficult? Is it a karmic thing? That would be easy to explain, wouldn't it? But I think that sometimes it takes some not sometimes, every time, it takes some deep diving inward to discern what blocks are within our own mentality and how they might have originated inside us. If you love musicals like I do, you might remember the song from South Pacific called "You've Got to Be Carefully Taught." I'm not as brave as Margot, I'm not going to sing. But the lyrics are important, and they go like this. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be carefully taught. And we've all been carefully taught, whether we're aware of it or not, through the belief systems passed down through the generations or through our current cultural conditioning. We may not even be aware about how these sometimes subtle messages and teachings have affected our ability to let love shine through us. That's where being willing to do this self-reflecting, when these beliefs surface, that's when it comes in handy. We might ask ourselves, hey, where did that come from? Or why do I hold on to that? These questions can be helpful in helping us to clear our consciousness and unleash more love. It also helps to be clear about what we want to be in this world and what we want to contribute, so that at the end of our lives, we're not in that existential pain thinking that we left nothing of value behind. When we know this and we set our intentions to love more, we feel something. It's a rightness. It's like a cog of a gear that just slides easily into just the right place. And as we grow up and evolve, we learn that love is a verb. It's an active state of being. It's not a noun. And a limitless capacity with us, that's love, a capacity that can be transmuted into all kinds of wonderful relationships, hopefully with ourselves as well. We discover the more we honor our lives by loving ourselves and others, the happier we become. Richard Rohr says, most of us were taught that God would love us if and when we change. But actually, in fact, God loves you so that you can change. What empowers change, what makes you desirous of change, is the experience of love. It is that inherent experience of love that becomes the engine of change. Sorry, I have to get my tissue out of my bra purse. Thank you. All right. Yay for the bra purse. All right. There's also a check in there for the church, so it holds many important things. I'm so glad I got this Kleenex. All right, before I started to talk. A primary focus of our teaching then is for each of us to become aware of that spark of glorious and holy love that is alive within us, and to fan that spark into a flame. Yeah, into a flame that just bursts through us into expression. Think of Bridget, the fiery goddess who was the heart of the heart. She's a good example. This teaching helps to remind us that a deep wellspring of eternal love and joy exists within each of us, and that this love and joy is meant to be expressed and released and given and shared and spoken and danced and played and sang and written and infused into everything that we do. In Matthew 5, chapters 43 to 45, the Rabbi Jesus taught, "You have heard that it has been said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Oh my God, that's a tall order. I don't know. We all may have, I know that I do, I have a ways to go to aspire to be that person that Jesus taught us to be, or more currently, that Dr. Martin Luther King taught us in his pursuit of civil rights and nonviolence. In one of his most famous sermons, Dr. King said, "At the center of nonviolence stands the principle of love. The nonviolent resistor would contend that in the struggle for human dignity, the oppressed peoples of the world must not succumb to the temptations of becoming bitter or indulging in hate campaigns, because to retaliate in kind would do nothing but intensify the existence of hate in this universe. Along the way of life, someone must have a sense of enough and morality enough to cut off the chain of hate. This can only be done by projecting the ethic of love into the center of our lives." Dr. Holmes knew this. He wrote something quite similar. He said, "Love does not overcome hate and fear by argument or force, but by some subtle power of transformation, transmutation, sublimation, invisible in its essence, but apparent in its act. As light overcomes the darkness, so the radiant presence of love and peace dissipates fear, hate, and confusion." Now, since we're also at the beginning, another February thing, we're at the beginning of celebrating Black History Month. So I wanted to include some quotes. I included Dr. King, who's one of my spiritual heroes, but I wanted to give some quotes from 3 more amazing women African-American writers. Octavia Butler wrote in The Parable of the Sower, "Kindness eases change, love quiets fear." And another one of my spiritual heroes, Maya Angelou, reminds us, "In the flush of love's light, we dare to be brave." And suddenly we see that love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free. And lastly, the poet Lucille Clifton gives us succinctly and briefly and profoundly the lesson of the falling leaves. The lesson of the falling leaves. The leaves believe, such letting go is love. Such love is faith. Such faith is grace. Such grace is God. I believe the leaves. When we act from love, it's not our ego that's doing the loving. Love is the ultimate principle, and when we are kind and loving and make space for everyone, this is the true engagement of our real selves, our highest selves, the manifestation of divine love. This is the highest calling for each of us and the road to a world that works for everyone. So we take that time to uproot, to examine, to work on releasing those beliefs, and by engaging with our true and highest selves, and by choosing to be a place where love shows up, we are then of the greatest service to the world. The greatest service that we can give to this world is to love more. So let's agree together to allow the principle of love to flow through our minds and express in our world one thought, one word, and one action at a time. And so it is. Thank you.